There have been a number of times where people have spoken to me about the terminology that I use on this channel, and they also see this terminology used on other channels as well. Today, I'm going to be providing a full glossary for you guys of Booktube terminology, so that anytime you come across these terms again, all you need to do is save this video somewhere, come back to it and go, oh yes, that's what that means. So let's get into the Booktube terminology. Starting off with Booktube. Booktube is a channel where you talk about books. Different people will talk about books in different ways. People will structure their channels in different ways. The only thing you need to do to consider your channel a Booktube channel is to be discussing books. TBR. So TBR stands for to be read. So generally speaking, when a booktuber talks about their TBR, they are talking about the books that they plan to read in the future. This might come up in a monthly TBR video, or they may be talking about books that they've hauled recently they plan to get to at some point in the future, but TBR just stands for to be read, books that you plan to read at some point. Monthly wrap. So a wrap-up or a monthly wrap generally refers to the opposite to a TBR. This is where a booktuber will talk about books that they have read. Generally speaking, this will happen monthly. So at the end of a month where you've already discussed the books you plan to read, you are now discussing those books that you have read. So that's what a wrap is. DNF. So this is one that has tripped up a lot of people many times in my experience, and this stands for did not finish. So basically a DNF is a book that you picked up, you don't like it, so you stop reading it and you pick up something else. So DNF can be seen as a little bit controversial because there are people out there who believe that every time you pick up a book and you start it, you should finish it. Personally, I didn't know about the concept of DNF until I started this channel, and let me tell you, it's been the best thing for me, because for me personally, why would I want to keep reading something that I'm not enjoying? So just putting it down and picking up something else can help me to continue my love of reading. DNF, did not finish. Now we're going to go into book lengths. First of all, double tome. If you go over the 1,000 page mark, whether it be 1,000, 1001, 1002 and beyond, that is a double tome. Tome. So a tome is half of that, 500 pages. If you get to 500, 501, 502 plus, that is a tome. Then we have the half tome. So a half tome is 250 pages plus. You get to that 250 page mark, 251, 252, 253, that is a half tome. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have novellas. A novella is a book that is less than 200 pages. So once you go over that 200 page mark, it's not really considered a novella anymore. You're more heading towards the half tome one. Audiobook, which is a means of consuming a book through listening to a book being told to you rather than physically reading the book itself. Now, some people will listen to an audiobook while reading along with the physical copy, but an audiobook version of a book is where someone else is reading the book to you. Ebook. An ebook is a book that has been printed or published onto a screen and is usually read on a device. Your mobile/cell phone, your iPad, your computer, if it is printed on an actual device or a screen that you're reading it from, that is an ebook. Physical book. Physical book is the only option that's left. That's your actual physical, tangible books. Paperback versus hardcover. A paperback book is a book that is bound with a paper cover. A hardback is a book that has been covered with a firmer cover. This is an example of a paperback book because the cover of the book is a papery kind of cover. This is an example of a hardcover because the cover is a lot thicker and a lot sturdier. So basically your paperbacks are the standard editions that you will get in your bookstores. They are a lot cheaper, but they will wear and tear more quickly. It still takes a long time for them to wear and tear, especially if you keep your books in good condition. But hardcovers take a much longer time for the book to wear and tear. And yeah, the big difference between the two of them is the paperback book has a thinner cover, the hardback book has a much thicker cover. An ARC. An ARC stands for Advanced Reader Copy. So this is an advanced copy that is sent out to someone prior to the mass marketing published date. Generally speaking, the reason for this is to publish the book before its actual release date. Generally, these books will go out to booktubers, bookstagrammers, book vloggers, bookstores, just to get the word out there. Here's a little look at an advanced reader copy. This book is coming up, and it's great because booktubers who receive advanced reader copies can read these books and then promote them on their channel. And then when the book does come out, because it's been spoken about so much by so many different booktubers, it's had a lot of coverage, people have heard a lot in a spoiler-free way about this book, then they will want to, they feel enticed to pick up that book. So it works both ways. It works for the booktuber, and it also works for the publishing house. POV. Now, I don't generally use the term POV, but the acronym POV stands for point of view. Now that you know that, let's go into how books can be written from a different number of points of view. Another word for point of view is perspective. So, here we go. Dual perspective. A dual perspective is a book that is written from the perspective of two things, be it two different characters or be it two different timelines. Generally speaking, with a dual perspective, these will alternate between the perspectives per chapter. So you might have chapter 1 being what's happening currently in the timeline, and then chapter 2 might go back into the past. Chapter 3 is back in the current day, chapter 4 is back in the past, or if you're following two characters' perspectives, then you might have Adam's perspective in chapter 1, Chantel's perspective in chapter 2, Adam's perspective in chapter 3, Chantel's perspective in chapter 4. Dual perspective writing style is where you are following two things that are occurring through alternating chapters. Multi-perspective. So a multi-perspective book takes the dual perspective one step further, where you have 3 or more things that you are following. Most of the time with multi-perspective, it is with characters. So you can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The list goes on with the amount of different perspectives that you may be following. Again, alternating chapter to chapter. So you might have chapter 1 being Marjorie, chapter 2 being Jen, chapter 3 being Sally, chapter 4 being Simon, and then chapter 5 is back to Marjorie, chapter 6 back to Jen, chapter 7, so on and so forth. So there's your multi-perspective. Canon. So canon is not referring to an actual canon. What this is referring to is the original source material. So have you seen TV shows or films and found out that they are based on a book that has been written? Yeah, so the book in this case, if the film or TV show is based on the book is the original source material because that is what came first. Kind of like the chicken or the egg. In this case, the book is the original source material. Now, the reason why booktubers and other people will refer to canon versus non-canon is because let's go with this adaptation of a book coming first and being turned into a film, and let's just say that the film cuts out things that were in the book, or the film adds things that wasn't in the book. Canon refers to what happened in the original source material versus what happens in the adaptation. So let's just say if we have a boy who's walking down the street and he walks up to a girl whose name is Sally, and Sally tells her about a magic system that she has. Then in the movie, we have the boy walking up to another boy whose name is Thomas, and he tells him about the magic system. Then what we say is that this is not canonical. This is not canon, because in the canon, the original source material, the boy walked up to a girl named Sally, whereas in the film, the boy walks up to a boy named Tom. You can see how that changes. MC. So this is an acronym that stands for main character, protagonist, the main person or character that we are following throughout the book. Trope. So a trope is something that is done many, many times, something that we see occurring all the time in books, particularly when it comes to certain genres. For example, Chosen Ones, Dead Parents, MC being an outsider. Those are tropes. Cliche. Now, a cliche differs to a trope because a cliche is something that we see being done in books or certain genres of books, and they're being done over and over and over again, and the same thing doesn't change, not even slightly. Whereas with a trope, it might be the same thing, but it might be done differently. So with a trope, say you have a main character who is an outsider, they might be an outsider because they have a magical ability but no one else does, where in another book they might be an outsider because everyone else has a magical ability and they don't. Where with a cliche, it would be this character is an outsider because they don't have a magical ability but everyone else does, and then we read another book and the exact same thing happens, the exact same thing happens, the exact same thing happens. That's a cliche. Now we're going to talk about plot-driven books. So a plot-driven book is, as it sounds, it's a book that is driven by the plot. The main focus is the plot is what drives the story forward, twists and turns, things like that. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, a character-driven book is a book that is driven literally by the characters themselves. The book is literally following the characters, and there might be little to no plot at all in the book because the point of the book, the whole reason the author wrote this book, was to focus directly on characters and character development as opposed to plot and story. Plot convenience. The plot convenience is something that comes up conveniently for a character, and generally speaking, when you read this trope time and time and time again as a reader, you can't help but think, oh, well, that was easy, that was convenient, and that's what a plot convenience is. To give you an example, let's just say we have a girl who is locked in a room in a dark tower. There's no way out, she can't get out. A plot convenience would be, the girl's locked in the tower, there's no way out, how's she gonna get out? Then she looks down and sees a key, and this key just so happens to fit the door, so she can put the key in the door, turn the key, and voila, she's out of the room. The convenience being the key. It was there, it was right there in front of her. How convenient is that? That's a plot convenience. Now we're going to talk about info dump / exposition. So an info dump is where a reader will tell you as opposed to show you what is going on. Generally speaking, this will happen when an author feels the need to explain something to you, the reader, directly. And now we're going to talk about the opposite of that, show rather than tell. So if an author is showing you rather than telling you, being info dumping or exposition, then this will be shown to you through the characters themselves. So while an info dump would be the author taking you out of the book and directly telling you, author to reader, what's going on, a show in a book would be the characters telling each other what is going on. So let's just say that the characters are walking past a brown tree. When it comes to an info dump or an exposition, the author would say, the characters then walked past a tree and that tree was brown. Where if we're going for show rather than tell, then we'll have these characters walking somewhere, and then one character would turn to another and say, oh gosh, look at that tree. How beautiful is it? It's so brown. It's like da-da-da-da. So we're learning it through the characters rather than being directly told it from the author. Writing style. This refers to the writing of the book rather than the actual story itself. When someone discusses the writing style of a book, they're more looking at the type of writing that the author used as opposed to the plot of the story itself. So it's a zoomed out way of looking at the book. Rather than focusing on Thomas, Paul, and Simon going to the shop to buy ice cream, we're zooming out of that and looking at the writing that was used. Flowery writing. So pretty. Not really. Flowery writing is when an author uses a lot of complicated words, metaphors, similes, and terminology in order to sound skillful. Flowery writing is usually more appreciated by those who prefer to critique books, more specifically to critique a writing style than to critique the actual plot itself. Those who generally prefer to critique the plot itself can find the flowery writing style rather distracting. Lyrical writing. So this is when the writing style is more presented in a poetry sort of form as opposed to a standard narration. Now we're going to talk about age ranges, and the first age range is MG, otherwise known as middle grade. This is where authors are writing a book where the intended target audience 8 to 12. YA. YA stands for young adult, and these books are generally written by authors with an intended target audience of 13 to 17. And then we have adult, which is where the author's intended target audience is 18 plus. So these age ranges are typically marketed to help you to see what type of book it is that you want to read. If you want to read something light and fluffy, generally middle grade is the go. If you want to read something that's very teen boppy-ish, then YA is the go. And if you want to read something that is darker, where there's no limitations on certain mature themes that can be brought up, then adult is the way to go. It's just to help the reader, basically. Speaking of adult books, let's talk about some terminology that may come up when an adult book is being discussed. First up, profanity. Profanity is swearing. So the F word, the C word, the B word, we could go on and on and on and on and on. Generally speaking, when a book is littered, and I mean littered, with profanity, it's going to be an adult book. Graphic scenes. Scenes that are more often on the mature side, that are being written in a way where you can sense them all. You can feel them, hear them, see them, all that sort of thing, okay? All that kind of stuff. Sexual abuse. So this is the terminology that booktubers are currently using because YouTube is frowning on the R word being used. The R word being used. So we now use the term sexual abuse. For those of you who don't know, sexual abuse refers to any sort of situation where one character is being abused in a sexual way and they don't want this to happen. Or it could be that they don't mind that it's happening, but that they're too young to know any better. And if the character who's doing the abuse is significantly older, it's seen as sexual abuse because they're older, they're more mature, they should know better than to take advantage of someone that is so young. Now we're going to jump over into the fantasy side of things because there's some quick fantasy terminology that I want to let you guys know of because I keep mentioning it all the time on my channel. So here we go. World building. World building is whatever builds up the world. Environment, politics, culture, religion, anything that can build up that world is considered world building. World building is generally used in high fantasy, which we'll discuss in just a moment. Now let's talk about the differences between low fantasy and high fantasy, starting off with low fantasy. Low fantasy is a fantasy book that is set in our world where magic just so happens to exist. Whether it's set in America, the UK, Australia, different countries around Europe, Africa, Asia, wherever it is, if it's set in our world and just so happens to have magic in our set world, then it is a low fantasy. An example of this would be Harry Potter, because while there is magic in Harry Potter, it exists predominantly in the UK, which is a place within our world that actually exists. High fantasy. So high fantasy is the exact opposite to low fantasy. High fantasy is when you take a book and you set it somewhere completely new. Brandon Sanderson is a massive example of this because none of his books that I've read so far take place in our world. Here I have The Way of Kings, and The Way of Kings is set in a world that we don't know. It's completely made up. So that's your difference. Low fantasy set in our world, high fantasy, completely different world made up by the author. Now we're going to talk about the different types of magic systems. So we have the soft magic system. The soft magic system is built on throughout the story. There are no extreme rules or limitations or bounds that are set within the magic itself. Oftentimes it leaves analytical readers with questions because they don't know enough about the magic system to feel grounded within it. Hard magic systems. This is the exact opposite, where there are rules and limitations and guidelines that are set around the magic. We fully get what's going on and know everything about that system, from how to use it to what happens if you abuse it. Now, just a minor note here, when I say laws as far as a hard magic system, I'm not referring to the laws that the people or the creatures are making up in this world. I'm referring to the laws of actual magic itself. For example, if you have a character in your book that is saying you cannot use magic outside of school because if you do, you will be expelled. That is not a magic system rule. That is a rule of the world. Whereas a magic law may more be along the lines of, if you ingest 1 gram of this metal, then this metal will give you this ability for this long. As you can see, we have those boundaries, those limitations. So I ingest 1 gram of this, it's only going to last 15 minutes. It will grant me this ability, but only for 15 minutes. Once that runs out, I no longer have that. You see how that's a hard magic system, because you know everything about it. You know the limitations of that magic. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I think this is more than an extensive enough glossary for you. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you guys again soon. Mwah! Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading. Bye guys, bye!